On a presentation to be loaded. Once it's loaded in the system, we will start the meeting. I will say that Counselor Stewart is excused. To order for our February 27th Transit and Transportation meeting. Today we'll be discussing micromobility and scooters, and we'll have presentations from some vendors on things that they've seen throughout the country as they've worked. We'll take that information today. We'll give some direction for staff, and then we will come back, and hopefully next month we're able to recommend out to the full council recommendation, depending on how many questions we have for staff and what we need. So that is what we're looking at to do. So I'm not going to promise that we will report this out next month. I will promise we will not report it out today, and kind of go from there, because we want to make sure that when we do report this out, we can leave it alone for a while and we can scoot to something else. Okay, good. Y'all laugh. You're awake. You're awake. So that's kind of where we are as far as today. We will discuss next month our TOD. So that will be on the conversations next month, looking at our bus rapid transit. And we have another pending item, our strategic plan review, that we will be discussing from our retreat. Not sure if it will be next month or not, but we'll be having some conversations on when that will move forward.
And your next meeting is March 26th.
Correct.
Is the next standing meeting.
Correct. So we'll meet again March the 26th. And because of, actually, we could still do it. Okay. April meeting tentatively is scheduled for April 23rd. There are 5 Thursdays in April. So tentatively April 23rd. There's it. So. Are we good?
Mayor Pro Tem, this is live TV, so we're gonna improvise a little bit here. So
okay. So what I'll do now is I will hand it over to our director, Michael Moore, and let you figure out the order that's best to give it time for the presentation to fully load.
So thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I think what we're going to do, Mr. Flood from Gotcha, is he is very well versed in this, and I think he is going to kind of fly solo without a bit of a presentation. So he's agreed to do that. So thank you very much. Mayor Pro Tem, members of council, again, last time we were together, we talked a little bit about kind of the state of affairs of micromobility in the city of Raleigh and kind of the path that we had taken to get to where we are today. We are at a point where we thought that that's our experience. The experience of other places might be informative to where we could go in the future. And we had maybe suggested that we could have some folks from the industry come in and share some of the experiences they've had in other markets and in locations where they've seen a high degree of collaboration and a high degree of success, and a high degree of compatibility between communities that they're in and the industry the services that they provide. So in that vein, we invited representatives from Gotcha, from Lime, and from Spin. These are companies, in some cases, that have had presence here in the city before, have a presence here today, and folks who have been continually engaged with us since we had gone through our RFP process, in the case of Spin, about some options that we could maybe continue to pursue. So today we have Shad Flood, who is CEO of Gotcha. We're going to lead off with him, and I apologize for not being able to get the presentation up in time, but again, Mr. Flood has agreed to move ahead with kind of his improvisation and take on this, so we look forward to him riffing on the theme here. So after that, we'll follow with CJ Shaw. CJ is general manager for Lime, and then we'll end the presentations of the industry folks today with Will Burns. He's director of governmental partnerships for the East Coast. So with that, I'm going to ask Mr. Flood to step to the microphone, and when we get ready to go, I'll be happy to help them kind of move through the different presentations. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I could just pick one of the other vendors' presentations and give it on my behalf, if that is amenable to them. Thank you very much for having me. I'm Sean Flood. I'm the founder and CEO of Gotcha. Very excited to be here. I want to take this opportunity to thank the city and city staff for allowing us to be partners over the past 4 months. It's been thoroughly enjoyable. As probably the self-proclaimed old guy in the space, I started Gotcha 12 years ago at a time when shared mobility was not a buzzword. Mobility wasn't even a word used in this space. I'm excited to talk about what we're seeing in the industry today, and more excited to answer any questions, because we're at a very pivotal time, but I think a very, very exciting time in the industry. There's a few things that are going on in the world that have gotten us to this point. I think a few things that this committee might not know, but 35% of trips, not only unique to Raleigh, but around the world, around the country, are 3 miles or less, and they're taken primarily by a single occupancy vehicle. The average cost of a vehicle to folks like myself and yours is around $9,000 a year. An average American parks that vehicle for about 23 hours a day, either in their garage or in a parking space paid for by themselves, their employer, or around a city or where they live and work. That's a lot of money for a vehicle that is, for that other hour, as you'll probably attest to living in Raleigh, sitting in traffic for that other hour of time. And then the other 40 minutes is a typical wait time that, as Americans, we wait for mass transit. So the overall idea is that our system is broken. You combine that with a demographic that is eager to do something different and get out of their vehicle and move away from a single occupancy vehicle, we find ourselves in this very exciting time where now insert some other vehicle. Half joking, if that would have happened 12 years ago, I would have been a real pioneer. We were just waiting for the marketplace to catch up. So nonetheless, excited that we get this opportunity today. But this trend is new only because of the demand from people. We're finally seeing pedestrians and citizens say, enough's enough. We want out of these vehicles and we need something else. But in order to do that something else, what I'd say is you have to be mindful about providing the right type of service. And that service is not just throw a bunch of things at the wall and hope that they stick. What I'll tell you from my time traveling around the country, and hopefully my colleagues from the other companies will say the same thing, that just doesn't work. The idea of let's bring a bunch of people together, throw a bunch of products out on our streets, and hope that everybody follows the rules, whether it's a vendor or a general public, we're seeing it fail all over the place. And the cautionary tale is we're trying to replace a system that is failing. We should be mindful and replace it with something that is working. So what we're seeing around the country is what I'd classify as a holistic approach. If the goal of the industry, and I think it is to reduce single occupancy vehicles, then there's not a single type of vehicle that's going to do that. I use my wife and I as good examples. We started the company together 12 years ago. She will not ride a scooter, even though I designed our scooter. And I like to think that she trusts my capability. I also designed our e-bike. She loves it, and she'll use it everywhere. So the point of that is it's not a product. What we're solving for today, and I think what this committee and city staff is solving for, is not how do you address scooters, how the industry across the country, what do you do with scooters? You ask yourself just that question and plan it for the next 12 months, I will guarantee you there will be something else. The idea is we're planning for not cars. And how do you look at shared mobility devices? So what I'm seeing across the country and what's being done really well in certain places is looking at the problem from a holistic approach and then solving around that. So how do we solve for scooters? How do we solve for your amazing kind of new e-bike system? And how do we integrate that into other shared mobility? So everybody, I think, who's doing it correctly, and I think Raleigh's got a great start on that, is looking at the multitude of products today and in the future and planning accordingly from an infrastructure standpoint. The worst thing to do is say, yes, let's bring all these things without a real plan of how to handle that. We're excited to be a part of that conversation, which I think we've been able to do kind of in the past 4 or 5 months. So approaching it from a holistic standpoint is key. The other trends that we're seeing is finally there's demand. So for the longest time, there wasn't a real true demand for the product type. There were diehard cyclists who then were excited to have bike share. There were early adopters who got excited about bike share there. We were in the bike share industry when you were still convincing people to do it. And then again, demographic, technology, frustration come together at the right time. And then product is what really is that catalyst to change. And I think that's the biggest thing that's happened in the past 18 months. We did not start off as a scooter company. We are not a scooter company today. It's probably 30% of our deployed fleet. But I'm thankful for the companies that brought scooters to be a mainstream product, not because I think it's the silver bullet to solve transportation, but it's opened everybody's eyes that there is something other than a car that's fun, convenient, and can be safe to ride if given the right parameters to do so. So all that being said, if you don't plan for things other than just a scooter, you're going to miss the boat a little bit on the opportunity of that side of it. The trend that I think we're seeing the most that is beneficial to that starts and stops with partnership. A good partnership that begins with conversations like this, really gets done in the weeds daily with city staff and residents of a community, is paramount to it. Without that, a good idea is impossible to execute upon. So markets who are doing it correctly have partnership around that. And I'll give you a few examples. We feel pretty passionate that shared mobility should live in the streets. Again, our thesis is we're decreasing single occupancy vehicles. They live in the streets, then the shared devices should live there as well. Without partnership, you can't move corrals and parking hubs and mobility hubs into the right of way. So you need to be able to have that collaboration. You also have to have a defined set of rules and then the ability to change those rules based on real-time feedback that we as the provider get and the city is receiving from its constituents. So without that partnership, again, you're creating a situation that will fail. And I think rules are a very important part of that. I'm in an industry where regulation is sometimes frowned upon. After 12 years of living it, if you don't go along with the university or the city who owns the right-of-ways, there's no path to winning, right? They've been your streets for time and eternity, and they will be your streets for time and eternity to come. So unless we play within those boundaries and create a partnership, again, you're setting yourself up for maybe a short-term victory, but a very long-term failure. And that's playing out in communities across the country. And Raleigh has probably seen that over the past 12 months. If you don't do it right, there's a rapid backlash to that part of it. The last thing I'll say is collaboration between transit. Regardless of the product mix, if the goal is to decrease congestion and increase livability with a safe environment, if you don't have a way of connecting the other resources within your community, you're not providing a seamless transportation option for your constituents. So if we're going to drive people to use your e-bike system, which is fantastic, if there are pockets that we're not serving and you're not connecting other modes of transportation with that and getting vendors to play together with other authorities, there's going to be a lapse. You're going to create anxiety around the user behavior, and then adoption ends up kind of falling flat on its face. So again, there's some markets doing that really well, but you have to have the foresight to really want to integrate all of those different technologies, even if it isn't from a single provider. So I'll stop there. I really appreciate the opportunity. Happy to take any questions now or later from the committee.
I have one question. Hopefully others will address this when they give their presentation. What markets did you say are doing it well as far as the collaboration and partnerships, other than hopefully Raleigh?
Yeah. So I'll tell you this, and not just to be self-serving here. Raleigh has been great. We've been at it 4 months. We had a very rough start in the beginning from a delay standpoint, but city staff from planning it to execution has been world-class, top 2-3% of it. But it's because the staff comes from a place of caring about transportation. I think how you implemented your bike share system, learning and processing data, and understanding how to do this correctly. And correctly does not mean, spray and pray. It's got to be done correctly, and you can always grow. Shrinking is near impossible without backlash. So Raleigh's done it great. We recently launched a system in Mobile, Alabama, which has been fantastic. The primary reason has nothing to do with the fact that the people love riding scooters. It's the planning, preparation, and ongoing communication with the municipality. And they have a clear path to scooters are great, e-bikes are great, but we want more connectivity and more transportation options, even if Gotcha can't provide them, but working toward each other. Our focus from a little background standpoint is always university and mid-sized municipalities. So we're not going to operate in downtown Chicago. So Raleigh with surrounding universities is the history of the company. So I think it leads to that success.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sounds great. There you go. There you go.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Martin, and I represent Lime in the state government, and also CJ Shaw, who is Lime's director. in North Carolina. So we're going to kind of tag team on our presentation here. And so thank you for allowing us to speak. Yay. Okay. Always good when it works the first time. So Lime has a history of serving Raleigh. They launched bikes on the NC State campus in 2017. Lime still operates bikes and scooters on NC State's campus and will continue to do that. Scooters were launched in Raleigh in the summer of 2018. Lime did discontinue service in July of 2019. But since its launch, Lime riders have taken more than 675,000 trips since 2018. So, as Sean said, it's something people want here. Lime can't wait to come back. And so we hope that there will be an opportunity for that to happen. Want to talk a little bit about best practices. Lime operates in over 100 markets worldwide, so they have lots of experience with different policies and governments also, and they're happy to talk more in depth about any of those markets. I'm going to try to throw some examples in as we go through it. So first of all, fee structure. There's a number of different methods that cities use in order to charge the companies for being there. What we believe is that the per trip fees are the best way to go. And there's two really good examples of that. That would be in Indianapolis and in Cincinnati. And the reason for that is that per trip fees take into account the seasonality of this business. Fees are supposed to be directly proportional to the amount of enforcement. And as you know, when it's raining or snowing, in the wintertime, there's less scooters on the road. And so basically charging per trip is really a more efficient way. It's commensurate with how many things are out there and what sort of enforcement you'd be seeing. So we would definitely favor that. We think that that's the best way to assess. Also want to talk a little bit about fleet size. That's another issue that has come up. And I believe we're speaking for all the companies, but there needs to be a sufficiently large starting size of the fleet, and that is because these companies make their money $1 at a time or 1 mile at a time on these trips. And so there has to be enough demand out there. There has to be a scooter available when someone needs it in order for them to get on it, in order for that to be a way that actually works in the system. So we also favor the dynamic fleet size, allowing the best operators to have more devices on the roads, market-driven, making sure that, when there's higher demand, things that are coming, that would be good. Want to use an example of some flexibility that could be built in the system. Raleigh's known for the great festivals and different things that they have every weekend. Well, there's some things that would be great if there could be like special permits or special use permits to allow whatever the operators are there to have more scooters for X amount of time, like the Bluegrass Festival, or something where you would want to have people want to be moving around on those. It would be for 3 days or 4 days or whatever, allowing more to come in. Again, the per trip fees would be commensurate with that, and then bring them out whenever the event is done. They're actually looking at things like that in Charlotte for the Panthers games. There's a lot of ridership around that, just things, those kind of examples also. So that bullet didn't show up on there, and I'm sorry about that, but we would like to also look at some flexibility in terms of special use permits. Finally, there's some things that we'd like to talk about that other cities have done that would be great to avoid. So overly restrictive operating hours really don't benefit people that either the service industry. One of the things CJ is going to talk about is the BRT line. The first BRT line will be going out to Wake Med. There's shift work there. And if you have, a very restrictive schedule requirements, you may not be able to catch those riders that need to be on the job at 11 o'clock at night or maybe coming off the job then. So we really want to, again, some collaboration and looking at what would work in terms of that. I think we tend to get in there thinking that the only people that are riding these are people that are going to bars and nightclubs and things, and there really is a whole universe of people out there that need alternate modes of transportation and that work at hours that are not 9 to 5. So also, we'd like to see, getting away from really aggressive rebalancing and removal requirements. And that's things that, we've shown over time that the scooters are being replaced all the time. So, as soon as they charge down, they come out and they replace it. It may not be necessary to remove every single scooter from the streets at night. And not only is that, it's a problem in terms of, just being out there and trying to get them all collected, but it sort of defeats the purpose of having alternative modes of transportation if you then get in a truck and have to drive all around everywhere picking up the scooters and bringing them in. So not every scooter would necessarily have to be pulled in at night, and we'd like the opportunity to discuss that further. Selecting the best qualified operators to do this. So a qualified operator, this is what we think. They have a local team. They have someone here on the ground. They're very responsive to staff and citizens. They bring innovative solutions to the table, and they're committed to the community and actively engaging with them. We just think those are good things that make operators really strong. There were some indemnification requirements that were in the original contract that Lime had with the city, and so I think the company's moved a little bit. I think the city's moved a little bit on that. I hope that we're getting a lot closer on there. Absolutely, Lime will indemnify against hardware defects, 100%, but not against defective infrastructure. So, for example, I think we've talked to all of you about this. If there's a pothole in the road, a rider goes and hits it, it's not the scooter's fault that was in there and it hit that. So anything that Lime has control over, they would be willing to indemnify. And then the last thing is just a willingness to look at all the current and available infrastructure that we have. So, right now the scooters are in bike lanes in Raleigh, but there are some areas of the city where it might be safer and a better method to maybe use some of the greenway system for that. Not all of it, not everywhere, but there may be some connections in that would make it safer for riders, better for traffic if that was available. So we would just like the opportunity to be able to do that as well. So I'm going to turn it over to CJ, and he's going to talk a little bit about some of the data sharing and the safety programs that Lime has.
Thanks again for the opportunity to speak today. My name, again, is CJ Shaw. I'm the North Carolina General Manager for Lime. So want to talk a little bit about data sharing. One of the things that we talk about when we talk to cities is we do want it to be a collaborative approach. And one of the things that we can do to make it a collaborative approach is to share data and show you through data how your citizens are using the service. So these maps that I have up here are actually two separate heat map examples from the city of Charlotte. Something we talk about all the time in our partnerships is the idea of first and last mile transit and the ability to use our service to complement existing forms of transit in various cities. And when we talk to the city of Charlotte, one of the ways that we're able to show that that's actually proving out is by showing them this kind of data. So if you look on the map on the left, starting in the southwest corner of the map, stretching into Center City, and then stretching into the northeast corner, we kind of call that the long tail. That is directly mirroring the major stops on our Lynx Blue Line. And so we're able to show through data that we're not just paying lip service to first and last mile transit, that this is actually proving out and the citizens are using it in that way. The map on the right is actually just plots of trip starts and trips ends over a course of time. And again, it shows a lot of the same information, but it's really valuable to cities as they're looking at thinking about infrastructure improvements, parking corrals, for example, and really looking at where would we get the best benefit for putting these. We're able to kind of provide that data that helps cities make some informed decisions on what they want to do moving forward. So I think one of the bits of feedback that we've certainly gotten from the city of Raleigh, and we've also gotten from other cities, is they're looking to the operators to bring innovative solutions to the table to address the different aspects of a micromobility program. I'm going to talk specifically today about some of the things that we're doing to address safety, but we have product solutions for several different things related to our business. But like I said, today I'm going to focus primarily on the ones that are related to safety. So the first one that we have is sidewalk riding detection, and this is actually something that we've just rolled out. We're piloting in the city of San Jose. We actually just rolled this out within the last month. I'll quickly describe how it works. So essentially what we're doing is our data scientists are looking at speedometer and accelerometer data. And with that data, we have an internal algorithm that can essentially predict up to a 95% accuracy the surface that a scooter rider is riding on. So when we see that a scooter rider has spent more than 50% of their trip on the sidewalk, what's going to happen is they're going to get an in-app push notification that just says, hey, it looks like you spent a good amount of your trip on the sidewalk. Just as a reminder, please use the bike lane, greenway. Again, we can tailor that messaging to whatever the local rules are, but it's a way for us to reach out and continue to do some of that recurrent messaging on sidewalk riding. And in addition to that, the forward-looking purpose of this data moving forward is to be able to collect and look at trends of sidewalk riding in each city, and to be able to identify areas where it's happening the most, and again, share that data with you as some informative data for you to start thinking about how you could potentially bring in some infrastructure improvements to solve that. Because we surveyed late last fall our riders globally. Far and away, the response that we got when our riders were asked why do they ride on the sidewalk is because they felt like there was not a safer alternative for them to ride. And so I think that this is a technology that, as it gets more sophisticated moving forward, it's going to be a benefit to riders, and it's also going to be a benefit to pedestrian safety as well. So for a lack of a better term, this is something that we have today and can turn on in virtually any market. It's the inebriated riding screen. And so this is something that we can turn on. It would activate in any market we want it on after 10 p.m. And the way that works is after 10 p.m., a rider would go up and scan the scooter. They're going to automatically get a prompt that says, riding a scooter under the influence of alcohol is illegal, and you can be cited for it just as if you were, riding intoxicated with any other vehicle. And do you acknowledge this message, and do you acknowledge that you're taking that responsibility? And the rider actually would have to type in the word yes, so just YES, to be able to bypass that screen and then unlock the scooter. So if they're not in the frame of mind to be able to type YES, then they're then blocked from being able to unlock the scooter. And then a new one that, again, we're piloting currently is this idea of comfort mode. And I'll explain why we think it's important. But the way it works is, in the app, and in each market, we set a max speed on the scooters, and that's typically just based upon whatever the municipality sets the max speed limit to be. And in our app, we're actually able to give the riders an option for riding their first, let's say, 10 rides at a lower speed. And that gives them the opportunity, especially if you're a rider that's never used a scooter before or has, a little bit of trepidation on how it works. It gives them a little bit of a training wheels approach to using the scooter. And we find that very important because what we see in our data is that the vast majority of scooter accidents occur within a rider's first 10 trips. And so this is one of the ways that we're looking at trying to really address that. And then one of the things that we've talked about before, this is more non-technical, but First Ride Academy, this is something that we typically launch in new markets when we first launch. But it really is an opportunity for us to be face-to-face with new riders, existing riders in the community, and really talk about what the parking regulations are, where you can ride, where you can't ride, get people on a scooter in a closed course environment where they feel comfortable, where they feel safe, and get them acclimated. And we're finding that to be very effective. Like I said, it's something that we typically do when we launch a new market, but we are also looking at doing this kind of on a recurrent basis moving forward. And these two pictures here, the one on the left is just the product example of the inebriated riding screen. And then on the right, we have an example of what one of our First Ride Academies looks like. And that is all for us. Again, we appreciate the time to present today, and happy to answer any questions if there are any at this time.
Where's this picture from for the First Ride Academy?
Yeah, so the picture's in Nashville. We
Nashville,
actually conducted
okay.
one in Greensboro last December.
Okay.
I have a question about the capabilities of restricting riding on the Greenway and how dynamic it is.
Sure.
As Ms. Martin said, there might be places on the Greenway where we would adopt a policy that would forbid scooters. So clearly you have that capability, similar to your sidewalk detection. Could you get more dynamic and say, for example, during certain hours on certain places, scooters weren't allowed, but otherwise would be? I'm thinking like some of our lake parks that get lots of use, like say between 9 and 5 o'clock on a Saturday, but from 7 to 9, maybe there's not that many people out there, and so where it might be safe to ride a scooter early in the morning, it wouldn't be safe in the middle of the day when there's heavy use. Is that a capability that you can do?
So right now, if we were to change those types of things, it's completely manual. There's no automated set schedule that we can set for where someone can and can't ride. There are other things that we can automate. And then I would just say on, because again, you're talking a little bit about geofencing technology and GPS technology as well. There are some limits to that technology, right? Like there is GPS drift and there's margin of error associated with that. And you see some of that margin of error also with geofencing technology. It's not, let me just say, like, if a city asks, like, can you geofence this park and prevent someone from riding and parking in the park? Yes. Can you prevent someone from riding to this specific corner on this block face that's essentially 25 yards and prevent that? The technology is just not there at that level that it's that precise yet.
I have a question, but I may not be for you.
Okay.
The fee structure
Sure.
with the per trip fees
Sure.
in Indianapolis and Cincinnati doing that approach. Are there municipalities that are doing a hybrid, so like a scooter registration fee, maybe lower, and then the per ride fee?
Yes. I don't recall them off the top of my head, but that's typically typically how it works.
What's the most common approach?
It's hard to say what's most common. So we see per trip fees. We see what Raleigh originally chose to do, and that's what I would say in the early stages of the industry. The idea of upfront per vehicle per year fees that are paid in advance of renewing the permit. That's been my most common experience. I think a lot of cities are now starting to move away from that because of the feedback that we're giving you as operators, which is that there is some seasonality to the business, right? So it doesn't really make sense for us to pay you upfront for $400 or $500 or $600 or whatever the number is for the entire year if we really need, let's say, $200 in the wintertime, but during a special event we may need $600 or $700. And so I think this idea of a per trip fee is just a little bit more flexible, and it takes into account the dynamic changes in fleet and seasonality.
And we heard from Gotcha right before you, and they are still here operating, and they think we're doing things great, which I applaud that, and I applaud our city staff. But what are we not doing well, and why did Lime pull out?
Okay. So really that's threefold. So the first one was the fees. So the $300 per unit per year fee. Again, at the end of the day, we're a business, right? We're trying to generate a profit, and when we just looked at it on paper, we didn't feel like that we could pay that and be a successful business here moving forward. The other two were related to indemnification. So we were required to basically completely indemnify the city for any possible and conceivable thing that could happen on a scooter, including faulty and defective infrastructure, which, in our opinion, that's not something that we really have much control over. We do have standard indemnification clauses and all of our agreements with cities, but that blanket indemnity was something that was definitely a sticking point for us. And then there were also additional insurance requirements beyond the commercial general liability that we already provided that were going to prove to be very costly. And just those three in concert with one another, we just had to make the tough decision that we couldn't agree to operate here under those circumstances, and we hope to be where we are today, which is back in front of you. talking about how much the city of Raleigh is important to us, how much of an important market is to us, and how much we really want to be here moving forward.
Okay. I just have a couple more.
Okay.
Of those three, is there one in particular that if that barrier were removed would make it more profitable and more encouraging to re-enter the market, or is it all, like, where is the pressure point?
Yes, I think that the two biggest ones for sure were the indemnity and the fees.
So on the indemnity part, I mean, I know you operated in Charlotte, and we've looked at Charlotte's indemnification provisions, and I think I have it right here. I mean, their insurance requirements are double ours, but I think maybe their indemnification language, it's worded a little differently. So
Yeah, so most of the indemnification language is Lime will, agree to hold the city harmless except for, a few different circumstances.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Councilmember Branch said I pulled out my trial lawyer. I was not trying to cross-examine you. I was trying to get helpful information. Just have it.
Good afternoon. My name is Will Burns. I'm the Director of Government Partnerships for the East for SPIN. Good afternoon, Chairman Branch, Vice Chairman Buffkin, and Councilmember Melton. And thank you for having this hearing and giving us the opportunity to talk with you today. I wanted to highlight my colleague, Tucker Stevens. He's a Senior Operations Manager here in North Carolina. And we'll just get started with the presentation. I'm reminded of a quote by a politician who said that everything has been said, just not by everybody. So I will try not to repeat what others...
Pastors say that as well.
I like that. So we operate in 60 plus U.S. cities and 20 plus college campuses. We're here in Charlotte, Durham, and at Duke University here in North Carolina. SPIN has a partnership promise, which we provide to the cities and campuses where we operate. I won't read all of this for you, but this is what is important to us. And I think what I want to highlight is that we never launch without permission from the jurisdiction where we seek to operate. We put safety first. We scale up our fleets responsibly so that we can make sure that the operations issues are taken care of, and we have no issues at all sharing data with our partners and protecting the privacy of our users. These are a list of issues that come up with micromobility regulation. Trust and believe I don't have a slide for each one of those issues. I'm going to try to whip through these as quickly as possible so we can get to some questions. But I think the most important thing to start with is what does the regulatory framework look like? And I hate to say this as a former legislator, but you want to have a balance between what you put in legislation and an ordinance, which is very difficult to come back and amend and change, versus what you put in rules. So I would put in legislation those things that we know are probably not going to change pretty much throughout the lifetime of a program. So that might be the number of the size of the scooter fleet, the number of vendors that might be allowed to operate in the city, the rules of the road, for example, the obligations of operators, indemnification, insurance, data reporting language. But then there should be flexibility given to the actual administration to figure out, okay, do we allow scooter fleet increases based on different factors? Or there's a new device that this company wants to bring to the market. We should have the flexibility to allow that to occur if we judge that device is safe. And then obviously there should be oversight and accountability by the operators to policymakers through periodic public hearings and the like. The last thing I want to highlight is that equitable enforcement is really critical. At SPIN, we work really hard to comply with things that cities ask us to do. So you want a certain part of the city geofence, we'll put a geofence up. You don't want people to end their rides in a certain area, we'll put a geofence up that won't allow rides to end in that area. If we do that, though, and our competitors don't do the same thing, they gain market share and they gain revenue. And so while we're being good actors and playing by the rules, others may not be doing the same thing, and it puts us at a disadvantage. So whatever rules of the road are for the city, there needs to be equitable enforcement down the road. This will come off as heresy, but we believe that there should be a limit to the number of vendors that operate in any market, in part because it makes it easier for you guys to manage the program and to make sure that the vendors are doing what they say they're going to do. We believe in scooter fleet caps initially as well, because, we understand that policymakers have to face voters and constituents who are concerned about their city streets being overwhelmed by scooters. So if you're able to go to your constituents and say, look, we have this fleet cap in place, but But if you give the administrator the ability to increase fleet size based on not just how many rides per scooter per day that we generate, but our cooperation with the city, our willingness to implement the rules that the city has asked us to do, you give us the flexibility to continue to grow over time, which is important. I want to talk a little bit about equity because this is also a component of a number of programs. We think that equity requirements are good policy. We prefer to have equity zones where there's opportunities to choose different deployment locations within the zone as opposed to dictated deployment locations for equity. And then I want to highlight the interaction between equity locations and restrictions in central business districts. And I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but in many instances, our deployments in equity zones are subsidized by trips that occur in other parts of the city. So if you have a high equity zone requirement coupled with a restriction on how many scooters can be deployed in, for example, the central business district, you are constraining our ability to financially support equity investments. And so it's just something to be mindful about, because the other thing that we do in many markets, and I'm sure we would be required to do this in Raleigh, is we provide a 50% discount through the Spin Access program for low-income residents who earn less than 200% of the federal income level so that they can have access to micromobility devices. I agree with my colleague from Lime regarding the per trip charge. We feel that that's a more economically efficient way to generate revenue from companies operating in cities. We also believe that you can have a license fee as well, along with a per trip charge. But all of those costs, those revenue costs, should be tied to the cost of actually administering the program. I don't think that micromobility is at this sort of scale and size yet, where it could be a source for sort of operating programs down the road. I want to talk a little bit about operations. So I talked about geofences. I think my colleague from Lime mentioned this. You want to make sure that when you use geofences, that it's used strategically, that you don't sort of litter the city with lots of little geofences, because it makes it a very difficult experience for the rider. And then I'm going to say this, and it sort of sounds weird coming from a tech company, but tech can't solve everything. We don't believe that commercially available GPS is sufficient enough to allow companies to make a distinction between a sidewalk and a street. We're going to continue to investigate. We're going to continue to look at that. But cities should be very careful about requiring technical solutions that may not have been proven out yet. Because what you do is you raise the expectations of your constituents that these technical solutions exist, and when it actually doesn't happen, your constituents will be very disappointed. I also want to highlight that the market provides incentives for us to move our fleet around. If people aren't riding our scooters, we don't make money. And so we are rebalancing our fleets constantly so that we can make sure they're in areas where people are going to use them. The last thing is that really good cities with programs maintain ongoing communication and collaboration with vendors. So we provide input, they provide input to us, and we work together to solve problems as we operate in that jurisdiction. I'm just going to say this very quickly. I know that the rules of the road here in Raleigh are that people aren't supposed to ride on the sidewalks. As a company, we believe that scooters should be treated like bicycles. And that most cities don't have enough protected infrastructure so that people who ride scooters feel safe riding in the street all of the time. So there should be some thought about allowing people to ride on sidewalks. We believe people should be 18 or older in order to rent a scooter. And we, as a company, we believe in levying fines and penalizing people for discourteous riding, including bad parking, tandem riding, and the rest. I was asked to talk about innovation. We're a subsidiary of Ford Motor Company, so we're always looking at new devices that can be implemented. New devices are on the drawing board. And as I mentioned earlier, flexibility will be needed from cities so that when we have new devices that can be used safely, that we have the opportunity to use them. I'll quote former Secretary of Defense Don Rumsfeld about where the future of the industry is headed, is that, there are things that we know, there are things we know we don't know, and then there are the things we don't know. There have been a lot of changes in this industry over the last couple of years. I think it will continue to change and evolve with time, and I think it's really important that we have a framework that allows us to innovate and come up with solutions that people want. One last thing in terms of people want, these are charging stations that Spin deploys on private property in a number of jurisdictions, and for the first time in a city on the public right-of-way in the city of Phoenix. So these are spin hubs. They're spin branded charging stations. They are on the right of way in Phoenix, and people receive a financial incentive to park their scooters at the charging stations. And the reason why we're doing that is it reduces the number of vehicle miles traveled by our operations team, thus reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And it also is a way for us to help provide a solution to scooter clutter, scooter parking issues in different cities. And if we were allowed to operate in Raleigh, we would certainly look for the opportunity to deploy spin hubs on public right of way and on private property as well. So that's it. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I look forward to answering any questions.
Okay. I actually have a question because you brought something up, and it's actually for Gotcha and Lime. And this, you can answer by raising the hand. If you don't raise your hand, it tells me the answer as well. Do you all do setup on private property, hubs on private property? You do? Okay. And you do as well? Okay. It's interesting because this is the first I've heard of it, that you all actually will do hubs on private property, because everything I've seen is we need right of way, we need right of way, we need right of way. So thank you for opening that light, turning that light on so that we're aware of it. And I think that's something that, as we look at our policies here in Raleigh, something to keep under consideration. So any questions you all have? Go ahead.
Why is Spin not operating in the city right now?
We didn't win the RFP. We applied. We were not granted a permit to operate.
But based under the current master encroachment agreement, you were interested in operating with the current terms?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any things that we're not anything that we're not doing well that you'd like to see improved?
We think that the revenue, that the per scooter fee is really high, and is out of alignment with what we've seen in other markets. And so we optimally a per trip fee would be enacted as opposed to a per scooter fee of $300 per year.
Anything else?
That's the one thing that comes to mind. I mean, I can send you a letter later. We can look at the indemnification language and insurance requirements. But when we went through the RFP, that was the one issue that really stuck out.
I think you may be getting a questionnaire, and so you can respond to that.
Well, there you go.
Great. Okay. And also, thank you for this information.
Great. Yes.
It's definitely helpful for us as we're looking at it, and especially the chart of other cities and that you share with their fleet sizes, number of vendors, and contracts and things. So that's definitely helpful.
Thank you very much. My colleague Ashley Brown put that together, and I was grateful that she let me steal it.
I understand. All right. Anything else? All right. With that, thank you.
We do have a summary, yeah.
Yeah.
So, Mayor Pro Tem, I'd also just like to say thank you to everyone who traveled today and the industry officials who participated in this. I know that in some cases it was not terribly convenient, but hopefully this was informative for you as it was for me. I think it helps us to have, we see our side of the coin all the time. Being able to see the other side of the coin is always very helpful.
So it's a good thing I didn't counsel and reschedule.
That is, yes. To that, I believe when we were together last time, we had talked about this activity today. We had also mentioned that maybe to cast a slightly broader net, that we would consider doing an industry-wide questionnaire where not only would we talk to our friends that are here today, but some other folks out in other parts of the industry, maybe not just limited to e-scooters, which have kind of been a bit of the focus, but into other areas of micromobility. To that, we have been put together a quick draft that I wanted to share with you today, and to get your input on this. I'd like to really say how much I appreciate Fontaine Burris in our department, who did the yeoman's work on this and had done most of the kind of structure around it. Again, I think this is not necessarily a win-lose situation. There are areas of common interest that, you saw this slide last time, but areas of common interest for both the industry and the city. We want to make sure that we're providing a safe service, that we're able to be, equitable and responsible about it, and that we're consistent, and that we have the ability to provide some, the adequate physical infrastructure, whether we do that through policy or whether we do that through actual construction. So we are kind of aligned on that. To that end, we did put together this quick questionnaire tried to be very broad in some of the questions, hopefully very open-ended in the questions. We anticipate that this is going to be more of a kind of a qualitative study than it is sort of a quantitative study. So with that, I'm going to run through the questions very quick, and then I apologize, I'll read some of these slides, but we'll do this very quickly. And any feedback or suggestions you have, we'd be very open to that. And we'd like to be able to finalize this within about a week and have it out to folks, and then be able to wrap it up before, hopefully in a couple of weeks. We'll use email to get this out, and hopefully be able to get back to you when we get together again. So very quick turnaround, but again, we think it would be a valuable data point for us to go through. So first, kind of to what we talked about a little bit today, what are some recently implemented policies, either state or local, that allow communities to be better positioned to address and embrace future changes? As we said before, sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And Councilor Melton, I think when we spoke earlier, you said, how do we position ourselves well for that in the future? This question is meant to tease that out a little bit from some folks. Secondly, what are some successful strategies that are used in other cities to promote and enforce positive behavior? We can kind of lean on our partners in the industry, our folks who are here as much as we can, but ultimately the end users sometimes are the folks we really need to point to say, how do we get kind of better behavior out of that? This is intended to try to drive some of that and get some best practices from other communities. Third question is what pricing or cap regulations either encourage or prevent micromobility companies from successfully optimizing fleet sizes to balance ridership demand and desires to keep sidewalks accessible and barrier-free. And then lastly, cities have implemented a variety of caps on numbers and number of vendors. As companies compete for market share, there's also been a wave of companies that have pulled out of markets due to struggles with, frankly, profitability, and we've seen and read about that. We'd like to kind of inquire about what are some regulations and examples of strategies or regulations that have allowed companies to be successful in a very competitive market. And I think we heard a little bit about that today. So those are a few of the questions we'd like to kind of put out there and gather some feedback on. If there's some thoughts you have, we're open to those, and we'd be happy to entertain those.
Anything?
I was just going to ask the three companies who were in the room if there's anything we're not capturing in the survey that they think we ought to be capturing.
And maybe that could be the fifth item.
Yeah, maybe just like a catch-all question.
Yeah,
Certainly.
question, anything
Good
you
thought.
feel needs to be added. And one thing I want to mention too, and just here thinking, I've heard the conversation about riding on sidewalks, being able to allow it, saying, one thing I want companies to kind of think about when addressing these questions in anywhere, look at cities where you have a high rate of seniors that you may be operating or you may not be operating. And the reason why I say that is because Raleigh is becoming a place for retirees. And we have a lot of people walking downtown. And we also have a place where a lot of people who have their disabilities that are walking and moving downtown. They may not be able to move as fast as, some other places where there's a very high young population. I know the median age in Raleigh says 37 years old, but a lot of people are moving here, and that just means there's a bigger pool. So think about that impact. And that has a lot to do with the reasonings and the concerns we have about sidewalks, especially downtown, Cameron Village areas, and even Midtown. So please keep that in mind when you're looking at your questionnaire and completing it out, and understanding it when we make policies. We can't make policies for this age group or that age group or this age group. We make policies for the city of Raleigh, and we're holistic. So those are the things that we have to think about and consider when we're moving forward. So that's something I definitely wanted to mention. At this time, I don't think there's any more questions about this questionnaire. I wanted to see if there's anyone in the public that had any comments or questions. I just want to open it up for the public, something I always try to do at these meetings. If there's any questions or thoughts that someone may have. I see 2 people, so I give you all roughly 2 to 3 minutes. Please come down. And please state your name and address for the clerk.
Hi, yeah, my name is Mary Jo Gellenbeck. I live at 2206 Creston Road. And I wanted to make a comment on the infrastructure for micromobility users and land use policies that now design streets more for the capacity of a vehicle than they do for a multimodal infrastructure. And as noted earlier, people are riding on the sidewalks because there isn't the infrastructure on the streets for people to feel safe for it. And I believe that downtown Raleigh has the capability to create protected infrastructure for the slower moving vehicles, and that would enable people to ride in a more protected area, opening up the sidewalks for the community that isn't able to travel at those speed levels. I also think that lowering the speed level inside the city, if it's not already, down to 20 miles per hour on roads that don't have the infrastructure for the slower moving vehicles will create a shared space that's more conducive to saving lives. I'm also very concerned about using the greenways as a mode of transportation because for commuters, because the drivers can't see the commuters when they're on the greenway. And the best approach to transitioning to a more multimodal environment is if the drivers can visualize themselves to become scooters or bike riders in their commutes. So by keeping access to the greenways good, but keeping the bicycle infrastructure protected with concrete barriers so that cars can't go into the lanes, I think is the most powerful way that we can approach transitioning from a car-dependent society to more of a multimodal, connecting us to the transit lines and reducing our greenhouse gases. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
I'm Jeff Leiter, 1535 Carolee Mills Court, number 114. And thanks very much for making this opportunity for people who are interested to say just a few words. As the bus rapid transit corridors develop, and this is really coming fast now, one of the issues, of course, is for people who live near who will live near a bus rapid transit station to get to and from the bus, that kind of last mile or last half mile or first half mile. And so I think as we work on cooperative relationships with these vendors, we want to think about ways to encourage the utility of their services for connecting people who use the BRT corridors to their homes or workplaces. Thanks.
Okay. All right, thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Any comments from here? I have a couple things I want to mention. I want to see if there's any more comments from my counterparts.
I'll just reiterate again, I think this is an area that our city can lead. We're the city of innovation, and these are very innovative products. And so I want Raleigh to be the place that is most welcoming to micromobility, gets people out of their cars, and is a place that companies will want to come and pilot their new products. And I think we have work to do. And so I think this is a great step in the right direction, and I hope that we're going to continue this work. And I look forward to referring something out soon.
Okay. Anything else? Couple things. First, I would like if staff can also come back next month with some recommendations of things within our code that could help them better administer micromobility program. I think that would be helpful because I know by state law, scooters are considered mopeds, which is a whole nother thing. And if we're talking about access in scooters, or I guess now this new electric scooters part of Share Ride, and there's a lot of new technology we keep hearing here and there. Just whatever, staff, if they can bring that back to us here for us to look at things adjustments that may need to be made in our policies, that would be helpful for us to look over. And then lastly, I just want to say, first of all, thank you again. I know some of you've traveled, you flew in. Once you move here, you don't have to fly in. So feel free to go ahead and, keep an eye on your scooters locally. I think that would be extremely helpful to the overall economy of having you here. So thank you again for that. Thank you, staff, for your work. We will continue to look at this. I mean, we're here at this point because, truthfully, City Council went on break. We woke up one morning and we saw a whole lot of scooters. And there was no questions asked. They just appeared. And out of that, council made some very tough decisions that some like, some love, and some were indifferent with. But all of that brought us to this point where the ultimate goal is to make things better. That's the goal, to make things better. So I'm going to ask our Assistant City Manager, Ms. Hayward, if you have any last things for us.
I will. So staff will be ready to support you in a more substantive discussion about the kinds of, sorry, I don't know why.
We're going to call you Councilmember Knight.
I know.
Yeah.
Okay, hopefully it won't buzz again. We'll be certainly ready to help support more substantive discussions about changes that you might want to recommend to the program. It would be helpful for us to have a sense of the kinds of content to be covered ahead of the next meeting. I know that there's interest in what's possible and kind of the implications around fee changes. I think the city attorney's office is prepared to discuss indemnity and insurance in the right forum. This committee may not be the best forum for those discussions. But if there are other things, certainly we don't have members of the police department here today, but to the degree that you might be interested in topics that might impact public safety kinds of regulations, we'd certainly want to be prepared to address those there. So that can either be today or in feedback as we prepare for the next meeting.
I think for our next meeting, that'd be helpful. So that part of anything changes that staff could see, definitely from the police department, any feedback that they may have. I pray that we no longer see on the news a video of someone on the sidewalk riding a scooter into a car that's pulling out of a parking deck. These are things that happened, and so anyone can still pull those up. And those things, they're important and they matter. We have to make sure that not only the riders are safe, but the pedestrians and then people's property. So anything staff can come out from a police department standpoint, greenways, fees, that can help us determine.
Okay, greenways, that's helpful. So,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to be today, but we'll be better positioned to respond in the next meeting just if we have some idea of the places that are pinch points or opportunities that you might want to explore.
And then also if there's any speed recommendations that you all have seen in other cities. I heard 20 miles per hour. That's pretty fast. It maybe need to be 10 depending on location. So those are some of the things. But did you have something?
Yeah, I think a closed session discussion on indemnification may be helpful so that we can discuss with the attorneys what the options are.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think
Okay.
And then the only other thing is I want us to be nimble. So whatever policy changes we're making, I think that it would be good to have certain things in our code that need to be set out to sort of set the structure. But then as we implement, I want us to be nimble and adaptive so that when new products are rolled, I want to be ahead of the issue. So like Councilmember Branch said, things showed up and we were very reactionary. And in my opinion, the council at the time did not make the correct reactionary decisions. I know it's easy to say from the outside, but now we have the opportunity to spend more time looking at it because we're not reacting. So let's be ready to adapt, nimble, and more forward thinking.
thanks for that feedback. Certainly the request that the chair made around things to put into the code, we would certainly want to limit those things as well. We also share the opinion that, like the master encroachment agreement, other means might provide more flexible, nimble constructs for some of this going forward.
Okay. Anything else, Assistant City Manager, counselors, city attorney? All right. Again, thank you all for coming, and we look forward to continuing this conversation on micromobility and how we can move Raleigh forward together. Thank you all. Meeting adjourned.